Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. When adapting a vast and detail-rich literary world like Harry Potter, sacrifices are inevitable. Some storylines were shortened, while others, and entire characters, were erased completely. Sometimes this was justified, but other times it felt inexplicably unfair. Today, let's remember the characters who never made it to the screen, even though they contributed to the atmosphere and events of the wizarding world. Enjoy the video. Number 1, Professor Binns. Boring, but necessary. A ghost who died in his sleep and simply kept on teaching. Professor Binns was the only Hogwarts teacher who literally taught history without having a body. Yes, he was incredibly dull. Yes, students fell asleep in his classes. But he was the key to understanding the myth of the Chamber of Secrets in the Chamber of Secrets. Thanks to Binns, Harry, Ron, and Hermione learned about Slytherin's legacy and the ancient feud between the houses. In the film, this scene was altered and replaced by a generic conversation. But let's be honest, wasn't it a shame that the awkward but essential ghost historian never got his moment in the movie universe? Number 2, Ludo Bagman, the Forgotten Showman. Ludo Bagman was a charismatic, slightly irresponsible former Quidditch player who shone in Goblet of Fire. He organized both the Quidditch World Cup final and the Triwizard Tournament. His love for gambling got him into serious trouble. He owed gold to goblins, lost a bet with the Weasley twins, and kept trying to weasel his way out. His constant efforts to help Harry during the tournament seemed suspicious, but were rooted more in desperation than in ill intent. In the films, he wasn't mentioned at all, erasing one of the most colourful side characters of the 4th book. Number 3, Marietta Edgecombe, the betrayal that never was. Marietta Edgecombe was Cho Chang's friend and a reluctant member of Dumbledore's army. She didn't want to join, but supported her friend. Later, she betrayed the group to Umbridge, driven by fear for her mother, who worked at the ministry. But Hermione had cleverly enchanted the sign-up list. The word sneak appeared across Marietta's face. It was painful and humiliating, but also a powerful lesson. The film took a different route, for some reason making Cho herself the traitor. This caused confusion, damaged her romantic arc with Harry, and made him seem needlessly harsh. Number 4, Peeves, the loudest poltergeist. A fan favourite and Filch's sworn enemy, Peeves was absolute chaos incarnate. Not a ghost, but a true poltergeist. His pranks were a nightmare for the staff, but in times of need, he chose the side of good. When Umbridge took over Hogwarts, Peeves declared war on her, driving her to the brink. Even Professor McGonagall encouraged him, once hinting at how to unscrew a chandelier. During the Battle of Hogwarts, he fought to defend the school, but in the films, he's entirely missing. Actor Rick Mayall was even filmed as Peeves for Philosopher's Stone, but the scenes were cut, and he never returned. Number 5, Winky, the heartbroken house-elf. If you remember Dobby and Creature but have never heard of Winky, you've only seen the movies. Winky was the former servant of the Crouch family and a deeply tragic character. She was dismissed for something she didn't do and was emotionally crushed. We saw her in the Hogwarts kitchens, drinking, crying, spiraling into depression, trying to find purpose, and failing. Her story inspired Hermione to create SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. This storyline highlighted Hermione's idealism and compassion, but in the Goblet of Fire film it was all cut. Number 6, Charlie Weasley, the brother who was barely there. Charlie was the second oldest Weasley sibling. He lived in Romania studying dragons. He was rarely seen but often mentioned. It was Charlie who arranged for Norbert the Dragon to be taken from the Hogwarts Tower in the 1st book. He fought in the Battle of Hogwarts, and he was a role model for Ron and the others. In the films, he appeared in a single photograph, and then vanished. Given how often his work and importance are mentioned, it feels unfair that he never showed up in person. Number 7, Andromeda Tonks. Andromeda Tonks was nothing like her sisters. Bellatrix worshipped Voldemort. Narcissa clung to bloodlines. But Andromeda... She walked away. When she married Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born, the Black family burned her name from the tapestry. She lost everything, her home, her name, her sisters. But she built something stronger. In Deathly Hallows, she opens her door to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "You look so like your father," she says softly, mistaking Harry for James. Her grief is quiet, but constant. Ted is already dead. She doesn't cry. She doesn't collapse. She keeps going. By the end of the war, she has lost nearly everyone. Ted, Tonks, Remus, but Andromeda stands. She raises her grandson, Teddy Lupin, alone. No wand duels, no funeral scenes, just silent endurance. She becomes the last branch of a shattered tree. The films never show her, not even once. No meeting, no mention. The tragedy of Tonks and Lupin floats untethered. Their son Teddy feels like a loose end. Andromeda's presence would have given that story its anchor, a mother who chose love over blood and strength over despair. Number 8. Ted Tonks. Ted Tonks never raised a wand in anger, but when the Ministry turned against Muggle-borns, he didn't run to hide, he ran to resist. A Muggle-born himself, he had married Andromeda Black, who was disowned for loving someone outside the bloodline. Their daughter, Nymphadora Tonks, grew up in a home built on quiet defiance. When the new regime began hunting Muggle-borns, Ted refused to register. "I won't wear their chains," he told friends. He disappeared into the woods, joined by Dirk Cresswell, Dean Thomas and Griphook. Together they survived off the grid, rebel voices scattered in the dark. On the radio, his voice carried strength. The underground broadcast Potter Watch called him simply Honest Ted. And then he was gone, killed by snatchers. No final duel, no dramatic rescue. Just another good man lost to a dirty war. The books gave his death weight. It hurt. It reminded readers that the war wasn't just fought at Hogwarts. It reached every road, every forest, every home. In the films, Ted Tonks is never mentioned, not as a father, not as a freedom fighter. Even Tonks's grief is unexplored. One more name swallowed in silence. One more story that could have shown the cost of standing tall. Number 9, Quirinus Quirrell, before Philosopher's Stone. Quirinus Quirrell wasn't always trembling. Once he was a young scholar with ambition in his eyes. He taught defense against the dark arts, badly, but dreamed of greatness. He was young, nervous, and rather soft, Dumbledore once said, but very eager to prove himself. So Quirrell left Hogwarts, travelled to Eastern Europe, searched forests and ruins for dark magic, thinking he could master it. But in Albania he found something else. Or rather, someone found him. Voldemort, barely alive. A whisper. A parasite looking for a body. Quirrell broke under the weight of his own fear. He returned with a stutter and a secret. The films show only the end, the trembling servant hiding under a turban. But in the book, we get a glimpse of the inner collapse. "I was foolish," Quirrell tells Harry. "I met him, and I was no match for his power. He wasn't born evil, he was seduced by it. He wanted strength and lost his soul." That tragedy, quiet and slow, could have added layers to the first film. Instead, we got a one-dimensional puppet. No fear, no fall, no man left to mourn. Number 10, Augusta Longbottom. Frank Longbottom was a hero long before Harry was born. He and his wife Alice fought on the front lines of the First Wizarding War, side by side with Dumbledore, trusted members of the original Order of the Phoenix. Frank was an aura, brave, respected, feared by Death Eaters. But after Voldemort fell, it wasn't peace that found them, it was Bellatrix Lestrange. She wanted answers. She wanted loyalty to her master. And when she didn't get it, she used the Cruciatus Curse until Frank and Alice lost their minds. "They were tortured into insanity," Dumbledore says quietly in Order of the Phoenix. Neville remembers. Always. At St. Mungo's, Harry watches as Neville's mother, blank-eyed and broken, hands him an empty candy wrapper. Neville takes it. Thanks, Mum. That scene lives in the book like a wound. Frank doesn't speak. He stares at a wall. A man once full of fire, now a hollow name in a hospital bed. That moment defines Neville, not as a clumsy sidekick, but as someone who carries silent grief with quiet dignity. He didn't just lose parents, he visits them, he honors them, he learns from them. The films offer almost nothing, no names, no backstory, just a single, fleeting scene in the hospital so brief, it's easy to miss. There is no Frank Longbottom, no history, and without him, Neville's transformation in the final battle loses depth. He wasn't just fighting for Hogwarts, he was fighting for two broken souls who couldn't fight for themselves anymore. Frank deserved to be remembered. The films forgot. Number 11, Blaise Zabini's mother. Blaise Zabini was tall, quiet, and elegant. He moved through Hogwarts like a shadow, always present, rarely noticed, but one detail made him unforgettable. In Half-Blood Prince, when Slughorn selects students for his famous slug club, he invites Zabini without hesitation. His mother's a famously beautiful witch, Slughorn tells Harry, married 7 times. Each husband left her a large fortune. Then he adds, with a twitch of his moustache, they all died mysteriously. The line hangs in the air like dark perfume. A single sentence, and suddenly the room feels colder. Zabini never brags. He doesn't strut like Draco or snarl like Crabbe and Goyle. Instead, he observes, he judges. When Ginny Weasley enters the compartment on the Hogwarts Express, Blaise sneers, I wouldn't touch a blood traitor like her, whatever she looked like. He's cruel, but in a refined way, dangerous not because of brute force, but because of quiet contempt, and knowing who his mother is changes everything. A boy raised in wealth built on secrets, surrounded by sudden deaths and whispered scandals. He's not just another Slytherin, he's something else entirely. The films show Zabini for a few seconds in Half-Blood Prince, seated at the Slug Club dinner. He doesn't speak. He doesn't move. His mother isn't mentioned at all. And just like that, a fascinating backstory vanishes. Her presence in the books gave Blaise mystery and weight, a reminder that not all danger shouts. Some of it smiles, inherits gold, and poisons slowly. Number 12, Elphias Doge. Elphias Doge wore dragon pox scars like medals. A ministry official, loyal member of the Order of the Phoenix and one of Albus Dumbledore's oldest friends, he was there long before the fame, the battles, or the school. In Deathly Hallows, he is the one who pens Dumbledore's obituary in the Daily Prophet. His words are warm, devoted. He was the most brilliant student ever seen at Hogwarts. For Harry, reeling from Dumbledore's death, Doge's account is a comfort until the rest of the wizarding world starts to question it. At Bill and Fleur's wedding, Doge sits quietly at the table, dressed in his old-fashioned best. But when Rita Skeeter's book, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, begins circulating, Elphias becomes defensive. Rita Skeeter is a muckraker, he tells Harry. She twists truth like wet parchment. But even he can't deny that he didn't know everything about his friend's past. When Auntie Muriel interrupts and talks about Ariana, about Grindelwald and the dark secrets of Godric's Hollow, Doge is left speechless. He had loved Dumbledore, but he had not known him. That scene, filled with candles, clinking glasses and rising tension, is one of the few where Harry hears a version of Albus that doesn't match the hero he idolized. Doge tries to protect Dumbledore's memory, but even his loyalty isn't enough to silence the doubts. It is this moment that sets Harry on a new path, not of blind trust, but of discovery. Elphias Doge becomes more than a side character. He becomes the echo of an older generation, carrying both reverence and blind spots. In the films, Doge is a ghost. His letter, his voice, his stories, all cut. There's no moment where Harry reads the obituary. No strained conversation at the wedding. No wounded loyalty in the face of scandal. Without Elphias, the films reduce Dumbledore's past to fragments, robbing the audience of the layered mystery J.K. Rowling built into his legacy. Because Doge wasn't just an old friend, he was a mirror, showing how little even our dearest companions can know us. Number 13. Grawp. Hagrid brought Grawp to the Forbidden Forest in secret, after a dangerous mission into the mountains. Grawp was his half-brother, a full-blooded giant, small by giant standards, but towering and violent by any human measure. At first, Grawp resisted every effort to be tamed. He roared, flailed, and even tore down trees, but Hagrid didn't give up. "He don't mean no harm," Hagrid told Hermione and Harry, defending him with stubborn loyalty. It was this quiet, determined devotion that revealed a side of Hagrid many readers hadn't fully seen before, that of a protector, not just of magical creatures, but of family, no matter how wild. Grawp's bond with Hermione became one of the story's most unexpected turns. She was terrified at first, but over time Grawp began to recognize her, even care about her. He called her Grawpy, his clumsy attempt at saying her name. The moment was awkward, endearing, and strangely touching. Hermione, usually quick to snap at anything illogical or dangerous, softened. She even defended Grawp in front of others. This showed that, like Hagrid, she was capable of seeing past appearances, one of the deeper themes of the series. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Grawp fights in the Battle of Hogwarts. Not just a background figure, he throws boulders and roars in defiance, taking on giants and Death Eaters alike. The sight of him rampaging through the courtyard, defending the only home he had ever known, was a powerful image in the book. Grawp was swinging a broken stone gargoyle through the air, smashing enemies aside like skittles. He had come full circle, from untamed creature to warrior on the side of light. His inclusion added raw power and emotion to the final fight. But the films chose to erase Grawp almost entirely. His story was reduced to a brief, awkward scene in Order of the Phoenix, with no further mention afterward. This cut stripped Hagrid's arc of one of its most personal elements. It also denied viewers the richness of the bond between Grawp, Hagrid, and Hermione, a connection that grew slowly and paid off powerfully in the end. Without Grawp, we miss a piece of Hagrid's heart and a giant's quiet journey toward humanity. Number 14. Merope Gaunt. In the crumbling ruins of the Gaunt shack, hidden deep in the desolate woods near Little Hangleton, a life once flickered and was quickly extinguished. It was the life of Merope Gaunt, a woman whose story never graced the frames of the 8 Harry Potter films, but whose tragedy shaped the darkest figure in the wizarding world. Her name rarely echoes through Hogwarts halls or in the memories of fans, but her suffering, choices, and heartbreak are the unspoken origins of Lord Voldemort. Ignored by cinema, misunderstood by many, Merope's life is a key lost in the pages of Half-Blood Prince, a key to unlocking the hollow soul of her son. Merope Gaunt lived under the iron shadow of her father, Marvolo Gaunt, a man so obsessed with blood purity that he couldn't see the rot festering within his own family. Her brother Morfin was no less cruel, spouting parcel-tongued curses and delighting in torment. Within their home, a filthy stone shack, as Dumbledore described it, Merope was treated not as a daughter or sister, but as a burden. Stripped of dignity, unloved, and constantly belittled, she shrank into herself, her magic faltering under the crushing weight of fear. Dumbledore recounted that her magic only truly returned when her father and brother were taken to Azkaban. Freedom, for the first time in her life, allowed her to breathe. But freedom also brought her to a choice, one that would define the future of the wizarding world. Across the road from her prison-like home rode Thomas Riddle, a handsome muggle from a wealthy family. He was everything the Gaunts were not: rich, respected, well-dressed, and confident. Merope's infatuation was immediate and consuming, but love, when born in loneliness, can warp into obsession. She had watched him from the window of the shack, and perhaps she dreamed of a life where she was not Merope the Disgrace, but Merope Riddle, a wife with a home and happiness. It was a fantasy that refused to die, even though Riddle likely never once looked in her direction. In her heart she knew that without help she would never be noticed, and so she turned to what little power she could. Command, an act of quiet desperation, cloaked in enchantment. Merope brewed a love potion and used it to bind Thomas Riddle to her. We are not told precisely how she administered it. Was it slipped into a drink, given in food? But the result was undeniable. He left his home and eloped with her. The villagers in Little Hangleton whispered in disbelief, the wealthy young man riding away with the daughter of the mad Gaunt. It made no sense, and indeed it didn't, not without the unseen strings of magic pulling at his heart. Merope, now Mrs. Riddle, in the eyes of the world, believed for a time that this artificial affection could bloom into the real thing. Therein lay her greatest mistake. Rowling writes, "It is possible, of course, that her magic was so deeply buried that she could not perform the simplest spell, but I think it more likely that her powers had been suppressed by years of abuse." When Riddle left her, it was not with anger or violence. He simply woke up one day, free of the potion's influence, and realized he had married a woman he had never loved. He abandoned her, returning to his wealthy family, and left her pregnant, penniless, and alone. It is one of the coldest moments in the story, less dramatic than a duel, but far more haunting. With nowhere to go and no one to help her, Merope wandered the streets of London. She sold the last precious remnant of her family's legacy, the Slytherin locket, for a pittance at Borgin & Burke's. The locket that symbolized power, lineage, and ambition was reduced to coins just enough to buy food. That object would later become one of her son's Horcruxes. She must have clutched it tightly in her final days, a reminder of what her life might have meant, of a family that once boasted Salazar Slytherin as an ancestor. But her pride was gone. Her magic was quiet. Her spirit, too. She gave birth on the last day of December in a Muggle orphanage. The matron, Mrs. Cole, remembered her as pale, ragged, and resigned. She named the child Tom, after his father, and Marvolo, after her own father. It was a bitter bequeathal. She said she hoped he would be different, Mrs. Cole recalled, but Merope died an hour after giving birth, not because of sickness or violence, but because, as Dumbledore put it, she no longer had the will to live. She would have been capable of magic, strong enough to keep her alive for her child, had she chosen to. It is that line, quiet and devastating, that defines her tragedy. Merope did not die because she was weak. She died because the world had taken everything from her, and she had nothing left to give. The films never mention her. They skip over the shack, the potion, the birth. They leave Voldemort's story suspended in myth, but the books show us that Tom Riddle was born not just of magic, but of tragedy. He was born loveless, conceived without affection, born without comfort, and raised without touch. When Harry first visits the orphanage's memory with Dumbledore, we see a boy who frightened the other children, who tortured animals, who stole and lied. But even then we see the shadow of his mother's life in him. Cold, proud, distant, he inherited her pain, but none of her gentleness. Number 15, Eileen Prince. Of all the shadows lingering on the edges of Severus Snape's story, none is more overlooked than the woman whose name he wore like a hidden badge of honor, Eileen Prince. Her name appears briefly in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, embedded in a dusty potions textbook scrawled with cryptic handwriting and only truly explained in the quiet pages of the book's final chapters. Yet her presence haunts the narrative as deeply as the man she bore, and her erasure from the films leaves a wound in the saga, one that renders the very title Half-Blood Prince almost hollow for those who only watched the screen unfold. Eileen Prince was a witch born into a pure-blood family. We know little of her life beyond fragments, but the fragments are sharp. She was a Hogwarts student, like her son, and a member of the Slytherin house. According to Dumbledore, the surname Prince was no mere flourish, it was Eileen's maiden name. And when she married a muggle named Tobias Snape, a man known more for his fists than his warmth, she became the foundation of a fractured home where magic was both a salvation and a secret. That union between wizarding blood and the disenchanted muggle world created Severus Snape, the boy who would grow into the half-blood prince. In the novel, the reveal comes quietly, without fanfare, in the pensieve of Dumbledore's carefully collected memories. After Harry discovers the old potions book covered in clever notations, spells like Sectum Sempra, and dangerous shortcuts, the question of the mysterious half-blood prince becomes one of fascination. But the answer is not theatrical. "I am the half-blood prince," Snape tells Harry after the dramatic duel atop the astronomy tower, and for a moment the line hangs with gravity. In the book, we are given the context: my mother was a witch, my father was a muggle, I'm a half-blood, I'm the half-blood prince. It's more than a clever alias, it's a cry from the past. Eileen's identity, buried under poverty and neglect, rises in the name her son chose to mark his brilliance and independence. The fact that Severus took her name, not his father's, speaks volumes. Tobias Snape was abusive, bitter, a man who loathed the very thing that made his son special. In the prince's tale, we see flashes of that upbringing. The scene slid into view, a small, shabby sitting room, the once fine furniture now stained and worn. A hook-nosed man was shouting at a cowering woman while a small boy cried in a corner. Eileen is not described in that moment, but she is present in the silence. Her magic could not protect her. Her pride, if she ever had it, was crushed under Tobias's bitterness. Why would a pure-blood witch marry a man like that? It is a question that echoes in the gaps. Perhaps she thought love could transcend the divide. Or perhaps, like many witches of her era, she lived in a world where her choices were dictated by unseen pressures. Regardless, what remains is a woman who vanished into obscurity, even as her son rose to play one of the most dangerous games in the wizarding world. The films never mention Eileen Prince by name. They never give the audience the key to the puzzle that is Snape's chosen identity. For viewers unfamiliar with the books, Half-Blood Prince becomes a cryptic title. There's no scene of Snape explaining the name, no glimpse into the tortured childhood that shaped him, no trace of the mother whose name he carried like a whisper. The title is uttered in the film, yes, but never explained. It becomes just another enigma in a saga full of them, not the emotional cipher it was meant to be. Snape's decision to identify as the Half-Blood Prince is a rebellion, a reclamation, and a betrayal, all in one. It is a rebellion against his muggle father, whose hatred of magic left the house in darkness. It is a reclamation of his magical lineage through Eileen. And it is a betrayal of the pure-blood supremacist ideology he once flirted with, a quiet nod to the complexity of his identity. In taking the name Prince, Severus aligned himself not with blood purity, but with intellect, with survival, and with the only parent who gave him the gift of magic. In a sense, Eileen Prince is the ghost behind many of Snape's actions. She is present in the boy who dreams of belonging to a better world. She is echoed in the teenager who finds power in books, not bloodlines. She is the silent witness to his heartbreak, his obsession with Lily Evans, and the choices that would lead him down dark and twisting paths. Eileen's son became a Death Eater. He also became Dumbledore's spy. The woman who could not escape the trap of a loveless marriage gave birth to a man who chose to live and die by a vow of love. When we see Snape as a young boy in the book, it's clear that his home life is a battlefield. He wore the same overlarge clothes that he always wore. His hair was greasy and lank, and there was a look of misery and yearning on his face. That yearning is tied to his mother's world, a world of potions, spells, and secrets. In the same way that Harry idealized the magical world when he escaped the Dursleys, Snape clung to the sliver of magic left in a life otherwise steeped in violence and isolation. And Eileen, however powerless she became, was the origin of that sliver. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry becomes increasingly reliant on the textbook's notes. He admires the cleverness of the prince, trusts the spell work, and even defends the mysterious author's superiority to the official curriculum. Whoever he was a genius, Harry says. That genius is Severus's, but behind it lies Eileen, the mother whose blood granted him access to that brilliance. There is irony in how Harry unknowingly leans on the very man he distrusts, but there is tragedy in how neither he nor the audience is ever made aware of the deeper truth behind the prince's name. Number 16. Teddy Lupin. Of all the names whispered through the rubble-strewn halls of Hogwarts on the morning after the final battle, one was conspicuously absent from the silver screen. Teddy Lupin, the son of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, was born at the very edge of victory and loss, a child who represented everything the wizarding world had fought to protect. Yet the films, in their rush toward cinematic closure, denied viewers the sight of this living testament to resilience. Teddy, who came into the world just as Voldemort was departing it, was more than an epilogue detail. He was a symbol of the next breath after darkness. Remus and Tonks did not survive the Battle of Hogwarts. Their deaths were sudden and cruel, their bodies lying side by side in the Great Hall, pale and still. But even as their lives were extinguished, Teddy's had just begun. In the books, his birth is not wrapped in fanfare, it is slipped into the story with grace and gravity. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Chapter 24, Remus tells the trio, "Tonks is going to have a baby." This line might seem like a momentary reprieve from the surrounding despair, but it echoes with meaning. The fact that two people marked by war would choose to bring life into such a world is an act of profound defiance. Their choice was not naive, it was brave. That bravery never made it to the screen. Viewers of the films never saw Lupin's hesitant joy when he told Harry he was to become a father. Nor did they witness the moment when Harry, bewildered and touched, accepted the honor of godfatherhood. The films omit this thread entirely, leaving Teddy without a face, without a name, without the significance he deserves. The loss is not simply one of continuity, it's a loss of emotional weight. Teddy Lupin's existence ties together the story's deepest themes: sacrifice, love, legacy. Teddy was a metamorph magus like his mother. This was not just a curious genetic inheritance, but a powerful metaphor. Where Tonks had made her hair bubblegum pink or electric blue in bursts of mischief, Teddy would be known for shifting shades as an infant, a visible manifestation of the whimsy Tonks left behind. In the epilogue of Deathly Hallows 19 years later, Harry watches Teddy kissing Victoire Weasley and casually remarks, "He's got her hair colour now," as though it's the most natural thing in the world. That moment, so brief in the book, was never shown in the films, and, in its absence, something vital is lost. For Harry, Teddy is more than a godson. He is a reflection of his own orphaned past, and a chance to offer the kind of love and stability he never received. "You'll stay with your grandmother, but I'll see you all the time. I'm your godfather, Teddy." The book doesn't elaborate more, but those words echo with significance. Unlike Dumbledore with Harry, Harry is present in Teddy's life. He does not leave the boy to suffer in silence. He steps into a role he knows too well, the role of protector, of anchor. This quiet act of healing reverberates through the page. Andromeda Tonks, Teddy's grandmother, is another unsung figure who carries the weight of an entire family's decimation. Sister to Bellatrix and Narcissa, she rejected her family's pure blood ideology and was cast out, First she lost her daughter to war, then her son-in-law. She is left to raise a grandchild who can change his face but not his fate. Yet we never see her in the films, never hear her name. In her silence, the loss is twice as heavy. She becomes the quiet matriarch of a story that never reaches the screen. It's not difficult to imagine how a single scene, Harry walking through the ruined corridors of Hogwarts, cradling a swaddled Teddy Lupin, could have changed everything. That image alone would have sewn a thread of hope into the cinematic narrative. It would have made Remus and Tonks's deaths bearable, not by lessening their tragedy, but by underscoring what they gave to the world. The films gave us the death, but not the life that followed. They gave us silence where a child was meant to cry. Even within the books, Teddy is not given a full arc. He lives in the margins, glimpsed in epilogue whispers, and deduced from inheritance. Yet those glimpses carry weight. In the Deathly Hallows, after the battle, Harry sees the bodies of Remus and Tonks. Their hands were clasped, and peace seemed to radiate from them as though they had fallen asleep. That image only becomes bearable because we, the readers, know they did not die in vain. Their son lives, he grows, he changes hair colours, he kisses Victoire under the Hogwarts sky. J.K. Rowling herself once noted that Teddy was sorted into Hufflepuff House like his mother. This is not a coincidence. Hufflepuffs are loyal, fair, and kind, traits forged not in glory, but in quiet endurance. Teddy's life was never one of dramatic battles or prophecies. His was a life shaped by quiet survival, by love passed down from a godfather who knew loss and a grandmother who endured exile. His story was not about destiny, but choice. Harry, Ron, and Hermione go on to reshape the wizarding world, but Teddy is the first real proof that this new world can sustain life. He is the first child of the post-war generation. Every scar, every loss, every sacrifice, they culminate in his being. He grows up hearing about werewolves, but not as monsters, about auras, but not as infallible heroes, about war, but with enough distance to question its necessity. He is the first to imagine a different kind of world, one not shaped by blood purity or revenge. Number 17. Susan Bones. In the shadowed corners of the Hogwarts narrative, beyond the grandeur of Harry's destiny, the sharp logic of Hermione and Ron's unwavering loyalty, lived a student whose courage never made it to the silver screen. Susan Bones, a name often skimmed over in the pages of Harry Potter, was one of the many students whose quiet strength shaped the resistance against Voldemort's rise. Her name did not blaze in headlines, and her triumphs were never shouted. Yet in her silence was the pulse of a movement, the heartbeat of those who stood their ground without spotlight or prophecy. A Hufflepuff by sorting and spirit, Susan represented everything the house stood for: loyalty, patience, and above all, an unwavering sense of justice. But her story was marked by tragedy long before the Second Wizarding War engulfed the castle she called home. Her aunt, Amelia Bones, was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, an incorruptible figure in a ministry slowly rotting from within. Amelia had earned a reputation even among Death Eaters for being formidable. "She put a lot of them in Azkaban," said Sirius Black in Order of the Phoenix, acknowledging the power Susan's family held and the danger that came with it. But power made them targets. Amelia was murdered in the summer of 1996, a brutal killing that left little doubt about Voldemort's return. Her death was mentioned only briefly in Half-Blood Prince, yet it sent shockwaves through the wizarding world. For Susan, it meant another shattering blow. Her family was already stained by loss. Earlier in the books, she had quietly confessed to Harry that her grandparents were also murdered by Death Eaters during Voldemort's first rise to power. These were not vague losses, not abstract casualties of war. These were names at the dinner table, faces in the family album, voices in the halls that would never be heard again. Still, Susan returned to Hogwarts, carrying this weight not as a burden but as a banner. While others whispered fearfully about Voldemort's return, Susan joined Dumbledore's army. She stood beside Neville, Ginny, and Luna, not because she sought glory, but because she understood loss and refused to let others suffer the same. Her name appears in the Order of the Phoenix as one of the first to join the secret group. She trained in spells meant not for performance, but for survival. She learned the disarming charm, the stunning spell, and most importantly, how to fight with conviction. The Room of Requirement witnessed her dedication. While the group trained, Susan never outshone others with flashy skill or dramatic duels. She was consistent, present, focused, a student who had already stared death in the eye, not with arrogance, but with the calm awareness that it might return at any moment. And still, she stood. When Marietta Edgecombe betrayed the army and Umbridge cracked down with her inquisitorial squad, Susan didn't disappear or deny her involvement. She remained firm. In Half-Blood Prince, when Slughorn held his exclusive Slug Club gatherings, Susan was absent, not because she lacked talent, but because her virtues were the kind that didn't appeal to elitism. She was not from a flashy family. She did not flaunt her name. Yet her lineage was as noble as any Malfoy's, built on the bones of those who had fallen defending justice. The fact that she wasn't chosen for such social privileges is a quiet indictment of the values Slughorn upheld, and a testament to Susan's character that she didn't need them. The Battle of Hogwarts revealed who had been preparing all along. When McGonagall called for the evacuation of underaged students, Susan stayed. She fought. In Deathly Hallows, her name appears in the list of those who stood with Harry in the final stand. Fighting alongside the others were Susan Bones, the book states, placing her among the brave, even if her wand wasn't front and center. This wasn't a moment of retribution, it was a final declaration of resistance from a girl who had nothing left to lose. Her house, Hufflepuff, is often overlooked in the hierarchy of Hogwarts heroism. But Susan's presence in the battle was not coincidental. She represented the countless students who bore the consequences of the war in silence, the ones who did not have a prophecy to guide them or a chosen one's path to walk. Her bravery wasn't born in the thrill of rebellion. It was forged in funerals and silence, in memories of lost voices, in the bitter knowledge that justice sometimes comes at a terrible cost. In a classroom scene from Order of the Phoenix, after Harry gives his account of Cedric's death, Susan unexpectedly speaks up. "My aunt told me it was true," she says, referring to Cedric's murder by Voldemort. That moment matters. Susan, usually quiet, lends her voice to truth, reinforcing Harry's account when others doubted him. This was a rare instance of trust extended from a peer who understood what loss meant and who recognized the weight of honesty in a world clouded by denial. The films erased her. Not a single frame, not a mention. Other minor characters made appearances, but Susan Bones, despite being a named member of the DA, a student whose family was targeted, and a fighter in the final war, was deemed dispensable. In the visual adaptation of the Harry Potter saga, resistance was narrowed to a handful of faces. Susan was not among them, and in her absence something was lost, the quiet echo of students who fought without prophecy, without destiny, and without applause. There's a chilling elegance to her story, a girl born into a family of targets, a girl who returned each year to Hogwarts, knowing full well the dangers waiting at home and inside the castle walls. She didn't wield fame as a shield. She wasn't protected by Dumbledore's personal attention or the weight of destiny. Her protection came from within, from the decision that if her family had died fighting darkness, she would live fighting it too. In a world where the powerful often succumbed to fear or corruption, where Fudge denied Voldemort's return and the Ministry censored the truth, Susan stood as a stark contrast. Her family worked within the system to defend what was right, and when the system crumbled, she did not. She adapted. She took the path her aunt had paved in the courtroom, and brought it to the battleground. And yet the pain followed her. Unlike some others, Susan's losses were never avenged in a dramatic duel. No Death Eater met poetic justice at her wand. There were no cinematic speeches, no slow-motion victories. That's what makes her so real. Her grief did not become vengeance. Her strength did not need theatrics. It was the strength of someone who bore unbearable losses and still chose to protect others. Even the Sorting Hat's original song tells us what Hufflepuff values, those just and loyal, patient, and unafraid of toil. Susan embodies this, not in theory, but in action. Her story is not a side note. It is the quiet mirror of Harry's saga. While the Chosen One wrestled with his connection to Voldemort, Susan wrestled with the aftermath of Voldemort's legacy. While Harry was targeted for his future, Susan was targeted because of her past. One wonders what her presence in the films might have added. A moment beside Neville in the Great Hall, a quiet nod to Harry before the final battle. Even a brief shot of her helping an injured student, such small gestures would have carried the weight of generations. But Hollywood edits for clarity, not depth, and so Susan was edited out, leaving behind only words on a page for the readers who looked closely. The Potterverse is filled with forgotten heroes. Susan Bones is one of them. But she is not forgotten by those who read beyond the main arc. She stands with the likes of Ted Tonks, Emmeline Vance, and other background figures whose lives were consumed by the war. She represents the invisible cost, the toll paid by families who didn't have a boy who lived to shield them. In the aftermath of the war, when the Great Hall fell silent and names were etched into memory, Susan likely stood among the survivors, not broken, but bent by the storm. Her presence in that final scene, if it had existed on film, would have been the softest yet most powerful tribute. A young woman who had every reason to turn away and still chose to stand, and in doing so Susan Bones becomes a symbol, not of victory, but of endurance, not of magic's grandeur, but of its responsibility. In a saga of wands and legends, hers is a story of choice. Not the choice between good and evil, that's often clear, but the harder choice to keep going when everything has already been taken from you. It is easy to root for the chosen hero. It is harder to see the quiet warrior in the background. But Susan Bones stood in the same battle, cast the same spells, bore deeper losses. Her name was not remembered in cheers or banners, but it deserves to be spoken. Because hers is the story of everyone who fought not for fame, but because they could not bear to do otherwise. Number 18. Enchanted Two-Way Mirrors. The air in Number 12, Grimmauld Place, was always thick with secrets, but few artifacts in the dusty old home were more silently significant than the enchanted mirror Sirius Black once gave to Harry Potter. It wasn't a grand, jewel-encrusted relic, nor did it sing or glow like the more spectacular magical objects one might expect. No, this mirror was simple, square, worn around the edges and quietly pulsing with a magic far older than its frame. It was part of a pair, a twin to another mirror kept by Sirius himself. And had it been used, it might have rewritten the course of the war. This mirror was no ordinary object. It belonged to a set created long ago by the Department of Magical Artifacts, deep within the bowels of the Ministry of Magic. These were tools developed in secret, not flashy but powerful, designed for members of the Order of the Phoenix to communicate across any distance. A simple incantation, a focused gaze, and a voice would travel from one mirror to the other, no matter the separation of miles, wards, or danger. They were practical, invaluable, and, most importantly, trustworthy in an age when the flu network could be monitored and owls intercepted or cursed mid-flight. The Squib archives at the Department of Mysteries catalogued many oddities, but these mirrors held a peculiar space within magical innovation. Though not created by squibs, they were so named because of the mundane, quiet reliability they provided. Tools that required no dramatic wand work, only intent. James Potter and Sirius Black were two of the early users of these mirrors. James carried his even during their time at Hogwarts. When Sirius was sent to Azkaban, his mirror lay untouched for over a decade, waiting as dormant as the memories it held. After his escape in The Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius returned to the world a fugitive, clinging to shadows. Though he had no place in the official fight, he still contributed, often acting through proxies or secret channels. One of his acts of hope, or perhaps desperation, was passing his mirror to Harry. Sirius meant it as a bridge, a lifeline. He told Harry, "Use it if you ever need me." But Harry, young, uncertain, and later grief-stricken, tucked it away, the meaning of it dulled beneath the weight of chaos and confusion. In the Order of the Phoenix, after the brutal confrontation at the Department of Mysteries, Harry sat alone in Dumbledore's office. Grief, raw and bottomless, coursed through him like poison. Sirius was gone, fallen through the veil, vanished in an instant, and Harry hadn't even said goodbye. It wasn't until much later, when rummaging through his trunk, that he found the mirror again, shards of it, cracked and unblinking. In Chapter 38, Rowling writes, he had thrown it into the bottom of his trunk in his anger and grief. But now he felt a horrible lurch in his stomach as he picked it up, realizing what it was. It dawned on him then, the cruel irony. Had he used the mirror, had he just remembered it existed, he might have seen Sirius, spoken to him directly, learned that the vision Voldemort planted in his mind was false. There had been no need to rush to the Department of Mysteries, no need for the ambush, no need for the loss. A simple call through the mirror could have saved a life. Instead, the silence became another form of death. The films chose not to include this detail. They presented Sirius's demise as a tragic, unexpected strike in the heart of battle, a moment to shock the audience, to show that death could be swift and merciless. But without the mirror, without the prior context, Sirius's death feels sudden, unearned, almost careless. The emotional gravity in the book stems from Harry's realization that he could have prevented it, that it was his decision not to look deeper that cost them both everything. This depth, this complexity of guilt and sorrow, is lost when the mirror is omitted. In the cinematic version of The Order of the Phoenix, Harry is plagued by dreams and false visions, but his means of verifying them remains limited to asking others. There is no hidden mirror to suggest another path, no subtle reminder of choices not taken. The audience is left to believe that Harry had no other way, that the tragedy was inevitable. But in the books, fate was not the sole executioner. It was oversight, hesitation, youth. This mirror is more than a plot device. It is a symbol of misused trust and the naivety of youth in wartime. Sirius's gift was an attempt to connect, to bridge the chasm between adult danger and adolescent uncertainty. But like many tools passed between generations, its value was lost on Harry until it was too late. There is an eerie echo in how the mirror comes full circle. Later, in Deathly Hallows, Harry finds a fragment of it, a shard he had kept in his moleskin pouch, and from it glimpses a blue eye. Aberforth Dumbledore, it turns out, had acquired Sirius's other mirror and used it to watch over Harry. This detail, too, was erased from the films. Aberforth's intervention in Deathly Hallows appears abrupt and convenient on screen, a last-minute rescue in a story heavy with last-minute rescues. But in the books it is the result of a long, quiet thread of Sirius's legacy, of mirrors passed between hands, of communication preserved in secret. When Harry asks, "Where did you get it?" Aberforth replies, "From Sirius, bought it off Mundungus." Another quiet injustice. Sirius's things sold, his tools scattered, his hopes turned into contraband. Even in death, the mirror connects characters across time. It is the unseen witness to Harry's loss and redemption. The mirror that might have saved Sirius becomes the mirror that saves Harry. Aberforth's watchful eye, hidden within it, becomes the turning point at the Battle of Hogwarts when Harry and his friends escape to the Room of Requirement. All because someone was still watching. The enchanted mirrors were never flashy. They didn't scream their importance, but that was their genius. Subtle, constant, dependable. In a world full of magic that dazzles and blinds, they were designed to listen. They offered quiet truth. In the world of the Order, where misinformation and betrayal were everywhere, these mirrors could not be fooled by polyjuice or illusions. They showed the person as they were, a true face, a true voice. It was the purest form of magical honesty. That honesty, however, cut deep when ignored. The loss of Sirius was not simply the loss of a godfather, but the severance of one of the last direct links to Harry's parents. Sirius had known James, had loved Lily, had fought for the same cause. The mirror was Harry's line to that vanished world. Its destruction mirrored the shattering of that link. What was once a tool of hope became a symbol of irrevocable loss. The enchantment behind the mirrors was never fully explained, but one can imagine the craftsmanship. Wards layered in concentric circles, bound with oath magic and perhaps blood, to ensure connection only between the intended pair. Such items would be rare, even sacred. One wonders how many such mirrors still exist. Hidden in attics, forgotten in ministry vaults, buried in ruins, quietly waiting for a voice that will never come. In fan discussions, the omission of the mirror is often cited as one of the great missed opportunities of the films, not because of the object itself, but because of what it represents, a chance at redemption, a small glimmer of hope amidst the growing darkness. In a world where prophecy and destiny dominate, the mirror is the quiet reminder that individual choices still matter, that the outcome can hinge on what we remember or forget in a single moment. When Sirius fell behind the veil, the scream Harry let out was visceral. But the moment lacked context in the films. Without the knowledge that Harry had a way to reach him, that he could have confirmed the truth, that his inaction led to the loss, the grief feels muted. Not hollow, but less personal. In the book, that scream carries the weight of unbearable regret. There's a line from the Order of the Phoenix that encapsulates this perfectly. "I should have known," said Harry, pounding his fist on the table. "I should have remembered. He gave me the mirror." In that moment, Harry is not just mourning Sirius. He's mourning his own blindness, his own failure to trust, and that, perhaps, is the deepest scar of all. The magical world is filled with powerful items, time-turners, horcruxes, elder wands, but few hold the quiet emotional resonance of the mirror. Its strength was never in its magic, but in the relationships it symbolized. Friendship, trust, regret. It was a gift not of power, but of presence, a reminder that someone was always just a word away, if only you remembered to call. As Harry grew older, he came to understand the weight of that mirror, not just as an object, but as a moment in time, a choice made, a path not taken, and in the end it became part of his reckoning. Not all lessons come from spells. Some come from the silence that follows, from the spaces left empty, from the faces that no longer appear, even when you look. In a tale where prophecy and war dominate the landscape, it's easy to overlook the quiet threads. The mirror, the note left on the table, the gift given in a moment of trust. But these are the threads that hold the story together. These are the threads that make it real, that make it human. And sometimes the thing that saves you isn't a spell or a sword, but the memory of someone who once gave you a way to find them, a mirror, a message, a chance. Number 19, Firenze the Centaur. Florence, or Firenze as he was known in the original text, was a character whose absence from the 8 Harry Potter films was not merely an omission, but a loss of something symbolically and narratively essential. In the 5th book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, His introduction into Hogwarts was a significant moment, quietly revolutionary in its implications. A centaur teaching at a wizarding school was an act of deliberate defiance, a mark of Dumbledore's resistance to the bigoted control exerted by Dolores Umbridge. And yet the films offered nothing of this story. The classroom where the stars told truths and destiny whispered its secrets through an ancient, non-human voice simply never existed on screen. Firenze was not like any of the other professors. His presence in the castle redefined what a teacher could be. He was not merely a replacement for Professor Trelawney. He was a counterpoint, a living rebuke to the human-centric and sometimes narrow traditions of magical instruction. Firenze viewed divination not as a dramatic guessing game, but as a profound cosmic tapestry that connected the lives of mortals to the movement of stars. His classroom was transformed into a forest-like sanctuary covered in mossy undergrowth and starlight projected across the ceiling. It was as though the class was standing in a forest clearing surrounded by trees and stars. The book described, here, prophecy was not performance, it was reverence. What Firenze brought to the narrative was more than aesthetics. He offered a new tone, a philosophical voice that echoed the centaur's deep respect for fate and detachment from human emotion. But unlike the rest of his kind, Firenze had chosen to involve himself in human affairs, an act that led to his exile from the Forbidden Forest. The centaurs saw collaboration with humans as betrayal. Firenze's choice to teach at Hogwarts was not only a personal sacrifice, but an ideological stand. The students did not understand the cost of his presence, but the readers did. The forest had turned against him. He was wounded not by dark magic, but by loyalty to ideals. The importance of Firenze lies in the unspoken conflict he embodies. He is a creature from a community known for its mystical neutrality, one that prides itself on remaining above the petty squabbles of wizards. And yet here he was, standing in front of children and teaching them to see the heavens not with longing, but with humility. In doing so, he defied not only his species, but also the institutional arrogance of the Ministry of Magic. Umbridge despised him from the start, not because he was a poor teacher, but because his very existence in that castle was a protest. When Trelawney was dismissed from her post by Umbridge, it was a cold and public act of humiliation. She was evicted from her rooms, left sobbing in the entrance hall with all her belongings. The teachers stood by, unable to act, their hands tied by ministry decrees. But Dumbledore responded in a way no one could have anticipated. He used the loophole available to him. Umbridge could remove Trelawney from her position, but she could not appoint a replacement. And so, with quiet grace and iron resolve, Dumbledore brought Firenze into the school. It was an act that burned Umbridge with humiliation. Firenze's arrival was not triumphant. He walked into Hogwarts as a pariah among his own people. The students whispered. Some feared him. Even the other teachers were unsure how to address him. But Firenze did not demand respect through authority or showmanship. He taught by example. His lessons were calm, slow, filled with images of celestial patterns and eternal cycles. He spoke of Mars burning brightly, of Saturn aligning with tragedy. He taught that the future was not for humans to control, but for them to witness with awe and preparation. He reminded them, "The stars have judged you to be untimely, but the stars may be wrong." These words, simple and cryptic, suggested a depth of wisdom that no other teacher had offered. The films chose to retain Trelawney's character throughout, minimizing her temporary expulsion and completely ignoring Firenze's arc. This robbed the story of an essential exploration of inclusion, difference, and sacrifice. Firenze was not just a centaur, he was the embodiment of what Hogwarts could become, a school not just for wizards and witches, but for all magical beings. His presence was a vision of the future that Dumbledore fought for, and that Voldemort feared. In the books, Firenze's lessons were not always understood by the students. Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil, once enamoured with Trelawney's dramatic predictions, found his teachings dull and abstract. But others began to sense the magnitude of what he was saying. The future, he told them, is written in the movements of the planets, and the paths we choose within those movements define us. His voice, though alien, carried a serenity that contrasted the turmoil outside the classroom. Even in a time of darkness, Firenze spoke as if all of it had been seen before, in the stars, in the long memory of the world. One of the most profound moments involving Firenze comes not in a classroom, but in his silent defiance. When Umbridge tries to assert control over him, attempting to insult and intimidate, Firenze does not lash out. He simply stares at her, calm and unreadable. His body, large and powerful, could have responded with violence, but his strength was in his dignity. He knew that to engage with her hatred would be to lower himself. In contrast to the shrieking, paranoid cruelty of Umbridge, Firenze remained composed, a creature above the pettiness of prejudice. The visual impact of Firenze in the forest was already stunning in the first book, when Harry encountered him during detention. A being of muscle and light, eyes full of ancient knowledge. That same presence in a Hogwarts classroom would have been breathtaking on film, a living bridge between worlds. But more than that, his scenes would have given younger viewers a lesson in quiet resistance. He never needed to shout. He did not hex or punish. He taught. He endured. And through his endurance, he resisted. Firenze's arc also intersected with the broader theme of who is allowed to be part of the magical world. Throughout the series, J.K. Rowling introduces magical creatures who are pushed to the margins: house-elves, goblins, giants, werewolves. Firenze's role was not just about prophecy, it was about participation. He was allowed to stand where no centaur had stood before, to speak within the walls of an elite wizarding institution. His hooves echoed not just on the floor of the classroom, but through the centuries of exclusion embedded in wizarding tradition. Dumbledore's choice of Firenze over another human teacher was deliberate and powerful. It reminded readers that the headmaster's rebellion against tyranny was not limited to overt battles. Sometimes it was fought through quiet inclusions, through the radical act of giving someone a place. It was these small revolutions, hiring Hagrid, defending Lupin, protecting Trelawney, that made Dumbledore's character more than a wise old man. He did not just oppose evil, he welcomed the outcast. Even after the Battle of Hogwarts, Firenze's wounds were symbolic. He fought alongside the students, risking his life for a cause he had once hesitated to join. Injured in battle, but acknowledged at last by his fellow centaurs, he stood as proof that change was possible. Acceptance, though long denied, was earned through integrity. He did not seek their approval, he simply lived by his values, and eventually the forest yielded. The exclusion of Firenze from the films speaks to a broader problem in adaptation. The narrative focus narrowed around Harry, Ron, and Hermione, stripping away the edges where the most provocative ideas lived. Firenze's story was not just a side plot, it was a mirror. He reflected the best of what the magical world could be, while also exposing its hypocrisies. In removing him, the films became more comfortable, less daring. They lost a voice that asked hard questions. There was magic in Firenze's stillness. He did not sparkle, did not charm. He stood like a monument, not of stone but of starfire and solitude. His lessons were not always meant to be understood immediately. They were meant to linger. And for those paying attention, they did. He spoke of choices wrapped in inevitability, of the weight of prophecy and the freedom of will. In a series built around a chosen one, it was powerful to hear that destiny was not a cage, but a current. The centaur teacher did not return in the final films. There were no forest glade classrooms, no prophetic stargazing sessions, no scene of students walking silently under artificial constellations. But in the books, Firenze remained. He survived, he taught, and he proved that wisdom often comes from the margins, from those who are not welcomed, but come anyway, bearing truths that others dare not speak. By ignoring Firenze, the films missed the chance to portray one of the most symbolically rich figures in the series. He was a reminder that change begins in the quiet corners, that resistance is not always loud, and that sometimes the future is written not in thunder, but in starlight. Number 20. Dedalus Diggle. In the swirling shadows of the wizarding world, some names are etched not in fire or blood, but in the quiet shimmer of loyalty. Among them, Dedalus Diggle flickers like a firework, odd, bright, and tragically overlooked. Though absent from the 8 Harry Potter films, Diggle's presence in the books was a quiet constant, weaving through the story like a forgotten thread in a vast tapestry. He was not a hero in the traditional sense, not the sort of wizard who strode into battle with a wand blazing, yet his contributions were real, his sacrifices sincere. The absence of his character on screen is not merely a casting decision. It is a missed opportunity to reveal another face of bravery, the kind that works in the background, away from headlines, far from the limelight. It was in Philosopher's Stone that Harry Potter first heard of Dedalus Diggle, though he didn't know it at the time. After a strange man in a top hat bowed to him in a shop, Harry remembered the moment with puzzled amusement. Later, Hagrid confirmed the man's identity, Dedalus Diggle, a member of the Order of the Phoenix. This whimsical introduction was no accident. Rowling planted the seeds of Diggle's eccentricity early, not as comic relief, but to remind readers that in the world of magic, appearances are deceiving. Behind the extravagant hat, tendency to bow, was a man deeply committed to the fight against Voldemort, even when the fight seemed already lost. When Harry finally meets Diggle face to face in the Order of the Phoenix, the man's enthusiasm nearly topples the room. "My dear boy," he exclaims as the members of the advance guard gather to escort Harry from Privet Drive. But beneath Diggle's theatrical excitement is a vein of serious purpose. The advance guard wasn't a ceremonial parade, it was a dangerous mission. The ministry was corrupt, Death Eaters were returning. Transporting Harry was an act of defiance. That Diggle was chosen for such a task speaks volumes about his reputation within the Order. He may have lacked the ferocity of Mad-Eye Moody or the raw power of Kingsley Shacklebolt, but Diggle could be trusted. And in war, trust is worth more than firepower. Diggle's eccentricity is never played for mockery in the books. In Chamber of Secrets, Professor McGonagall mentions him as someone who caused an accidental downpour inside a restaurant during a celebration of Voldemort's defeat. The image of him, soaked but gleeful, is almost childlike. Yet again, Rowling's storytelling hides strength behind whimsy. This is a man who celebrated the end of a war, not with ceremony but with uncontainable joy. He believed Voldemort was truly gone, and his mistake, conjuring a storm indoors, was the sort of blunder only someone unaccustomed to happiness would make. Diggle had survived darkness and couldn't help but unleash his light. Years later, when Voldemort returns, Diggle returns too, not with bitterness or regret, but with resolve. His most significant moment, perhaps, comes in Deathly Hallows, in a scene so intimate and fragile that its exclusion from the films feels almost cruel. When the Dursleys are forced into hiding, it is Dedalus Diggle and Hestia Jones who come to escort them. This scene is not about magic. It is about trust, forgiveness, and the bitter layers of a fractured world. Vernon Dursley, arrogant and dismissive, is faced with wizards who are willing to protect him despite his lifelong contempt. Diggle stands there, calm and patient, offering security not because the Dursleys deserve it, but because Harry loves them in some way. It's a moment that captures the essence of moral duty. The significance of that mission, guarding the Dursleys, is immense. The Dursleys, muggles who detested wizards, were not valuable in terms of magical strategy. Yet the Order protected them, not just as a gesture of goodwill, but as a tactical move. Voldemort was ruthless. The people Harry cared about would be used against him. Diggle understood that. His role as Guardian was both symbolic and strategic. "We're just as much a target as you-know-who," Diggle says in the book. That he volunteered, possibly knowing the Dursleys' disdain, underscores his quiet courage. He was not seeking glory, he was simply answering the call. In the cinematic adaptation, this thread was entirely cut. The evacuation of the Dursleys is reduced to a silent departure. No Diggle, no Hestia, no tension or dialogue. A powerful scene, rich with unspoken emotion and political nuance, dissolved. The removal did more than erase a character, it erased a tone. In the books, the war creeps into every crevice. Wizards are dying, Muggle families are targets, alliances are forged not from love but necessity. Without Diggle's appearance, the films missed the chance to show that not all battles are fought with wands. Diggle's absence from the Battle of Hogwarts is not a plot hole, but a reality of resistance. Not every fighter can stand on the front lines. The Order needed informants, transporters, and defenders in hidden places. Diggle, with his flair for disguise and unpredictability, was perfectly suited for underground operations. He may not have thrown curses at giants, but he likely saved lives through evasion and cunning. It's a truth the films neglect, that in war, unsung roles are just as critical. Every phoenix needs feathers as much as fire. In Goblet of Fire, Diggle is not directly mentioned, but his type of character becomes essential. As the Ministry begins its slow decay into corruption, the wizarding world becomes paranoid. Names matter, reputations shift, people hide their affiliations. But not Diggle. His unwavering stance is a reminder that some wizards never needed convincing. They knew where they stood, even when standing alone. That constancy is not glamorous. It's not something a camera can easily capture, but on the page, it sings. What's more, Diggle represents a kind of joy that resists tyranny. So many characters in the Harry Potter series carry wounds, anger, and vengeance. Diggle carries hope. In the darkest times, he bows to a child he once saw in a prophecy and treats him not as a weapon or symbol, but as a person. That gesture in Philosopher's Stone, the bow, is easy to miss, yet it is radical in its humility. When others saw Harry as a savior or threat, Diggle saw a boy. That ability to see humanity amid mythology is rare. His personality, too, challenges our notions of heroism. Rowling's world is full of brooding figures, Snape, Sirius, even Dumbledore. Diggle laughs, he cheers, he misfires spells and celebrates holidays with embarrassing enthusiasm, but when called upon he steps forward. He reminds us that lightness of spirit is not weakness, it's survival. That idea too is lost in the films, which often favour visual gravitas over quiet charm. The decision to exclude Diggle may have been logistical. Perhaps there was no time to introduce yet another character. But characters like Slughorn, who arrive late and shine briefly, prove that one strong scene is enough to leave a mark. Had Diggle appeared even once, in the Dursley evacuation, or among the advance guard, his presence would have reinforced the complexity of the resistance. Not every warrior needs to be tragic. In terms of storytelling, Diggle acts as a counterbalance. In Deathly Hallows, while the world crumbles, he provides a glimpse of normalcy. "We've set up a lovely little place in the country," he tells the Dursleys. The idea of safety, of sanctuary, is often mocked in war stories, but Diggle dares to believe in it. He dares to promise peace, even if temporary. That hope matters. It's the seed of rebellion. And perhaps that is his greatest contribution, Audette. Not a duel, not a spell, but the refusal to give in to despair. Diggle shows that the war against Voldemort was not just fought with magic, but with morale. Every rescued family, every safe house built, every word of comfort spoken. These were the mortar between the stones of resistance. His wand may have fired fewer spells, but his heart never dimmed. There is no grave for Diggle in the epilogue. No statue. No plaque in the Great Hall. That absence stings. not because the character needed honour, but because readers needed closure. What became of him? Did he survive the war? Did he retire to his cottage, tending his garden, waiting for another call? Or was he lost, quietly, without witness? The books don't say. Perhaps that's fitting. Some heroes vanish like sparks. And so, in this quiet injustice, the cinematic erasure of Dedalus Diggle, we're reminded that stories are shaped by the voices we choose to elevate. Diggle was not a star, he was a flicker in the dark, reminding us that even the strangest figures in the corner of the frame might be the ones holding everything together. In forgetting him, we forget a part of what made the Order of the Phoenix so human. Not their power, but their persistence. Had the films dared to show him, the story might have felt fuller, less glossy. We might have seen Harry's world not just as a stage for epic clashes, but as a living community of flawed, vibrant, necessary people. Diggle, with his purple hat and clumsy spells, would have reminded us of something crucial, that not all heroes are warriors. Some are watchers, caretakers, believers in the quiet parts of the cause, and sometimes those are the bravest ones of all. Number 21, Hepzibah Smith. In the many winding corridors of the Harry Potter saga, both in print and on screen, some shadows are cast longer than others. Among the countless portraits that could have been painted in the cinematic adaptation, the absence of Hepzibah Smith remains one of the most glaring omissions. Her story, brief in page count yet massive in narrative consequence, is a crucial stroke in the dark portrait of Tom Riddle's transformation into Lord Voldemort. While viewers of the films might believe they've seen the whole tale, they have missed a chapter soaked in velvet, vanity, and violent ambition, a moment when a rich old witch unknowingly played host to the future Dark Lord. Hepzibah Smith was not merely a name tucked into a memory. She was opulence personified, a collector of magical antiquities and heirlooms too rare to measure in galleons. She lived in a home that radiated old magic and older wealth, perfumed with dust and entitlement. Her goblin-made furniture gleamed, her curtains were embroidered with golden thread, and her walls whispered with the secrets of power. In her declining years, she relied more heavily on her devoted house-elf, Hokey, who served her with trembling fingers and unquestioning loyalty. But Hepzibah's most fatal quality was her pride. She adored her possessions and herself so thoroughly that she couldn't resist the chance to show them off to a charming young visitor. Tom Riddle, handsome and magnetic in his early 20s, was working at Borgin and Burke's, the sinister nocturne alley shop known for trafficking in dark objects. It was his job to convince reluctant witches and wizards to part with their valuables. Few could resist him. "He was a great favourite of mine," said Mr. Burke in Half-Blood Prince, recalling Tom's persuasiveness. Riddle's charisma wasn't merely surface charm, it was predatory grace, disguised with a winning smile. When he visited Hepzibah, he did not come as a buyer. He came as a vulture, masked as a guest. She welcomed him with flirtatious delight, brushing crumbs from the front of her robes and offering him tea in china patterned with mermaids. Her voice trembled with excitement as she presented her treasures, her most prized possessions, with a glint of self-importance. "I had to show you this, Tom," she had said, eyes gleaming. "It belonged to Helga Hufflepuff herself." The cup she revealed was small, shining with ancient magic, engraved with the badger crest, and known in legend for holding restorative powers. It was an heirloom passed down through generations until it came, somehow, into Hepzibah's jewelled hands. But she wasn't finished. With more caution and more pride, she unwrapped a heavy locket. "This," she whispered, "was Salazar Slytherin's." It was the same locket that once belonged to Merope Gaunt, Riddle's mother, stolen by Tom's own grandfather and eventually sold to Borgin and Burke's. Somehow it had been acquired again and now rested in Hepzibah's collection. In her foolishness, she brought it full circle, placing it within arm's reach of the boy who bore Slytherin's blood. Tom Riddle's eyes, said Hokey in memory, burned with hunger as he looked upon it. His voice remained smooth, but his intentions congealed like poison. The books never show us the actual murder. They don't need to. Dumbledore pieces together the truth through Hokey's memory, extracted in a shallow silver basin. Hokey believed she had accidentally poisoned her mistress. She wept in her memory, horrified, confused, her mind clouded by tampered thoughts. But Dumbledore knew, and so did the readers. Lord Voldemort murdered her, and he used poor Hokey as a scapegoat, Dumbledore said plainly. Tom had modified Hokey's memory and altered her recollection, ensuring that the elf would take the blame while he vanished with the locket and the cup. These two objects were more than collectibles. They were symbols of something Voldemort craved more than gold: immortality and legacy. The Hufflepuff cup and the Slytherin locket became Horcruxes, infused with the souls of his future victims. Their theft and the blood spilled for them marked a significant point in Tom Riddle's evolution. Until then, he had stolen information and dignity. With Hepzibah, he stole life and legend. It is no exaggeration to say that the murder of Hepzibah Smith was one of the most pivotal acts in the construction of the Dark Lord's twisted spiritual architecture. The films, in their haste, brushed past this chapter. They showed young Tom briefly in the echoing halls of Hogwarts or inside shadowy orphanages, but they never invited us into Hepzibah's ornate sitting room. They never allowed us to feel the trap slowly closing, never let us hear the cup clink on the silver tray. The absence of her scene is not just a narrative oversight, it is a theft of comprehension. To understand Voldemort is to understand that his evil was not sudden. It was deliberate, it was elegant, it was staged in parlours like Hepzibah's. There's a specific horror in the idea of a woman murdered not in battle, not in a duel, but in her home by a guest she welcomed. It strips away the comfort that evil announces itself. Hepzibah did not die at the hands of a monstrous man in dark robes. She died smiling at a boy with a pretty face. Her death was not cinematic in the traditional sense. It had no flashing lights, no wand choreography. It was silent, intimate, and cold. That's why it mattered. It showed that Voldemort was never humanized by affection or deterred by kindness. He killed the trusting because they were easy to deceive. Hokey the House-Elf was sentenced by the Ministry of Magic. Her punishment was likely harsh, her memories ignored because she was deemed less than human. Tom Riddle knew this. He didn't just kill Hepzibah, he ensured someone else suffered for it. His cruelty was multifaceted. He destroyed lives and reputations with equal precision. The entire ministry system enabled him by refusing to question the narrative. In this, J.K. Rowling subtly critiqued the institutions of her world. It was not only magic that made Voldemort powerful, it was bureaucracy, prejudice, and blindness. The absence of Hepzibah also means the films deny us the full extent of Voldemort's obsession with the founders of Hogwarts. He didn't just choose random objects to make into Horcruxes. He hunted sacred relics, items tied to the original pillars of the magical world. By securing Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket, Voldemort tied his immortality to ancient greatness. Each Horcrux was a statement: I am more than mortal, I am legacy incarnate. Without Hepzibah's chapter, this theme evaporates into mere villainy. The narrative becomes shallow, devoid of the mythic obsession that defined Voldemort. Furthermore, Hepzibah's scene would have offered a rare glimpse into magical domesticity in old age. She was no McGonagall or Trelawney. She was neither strict nor eccentric. She was indulgent, vain, and tragically relatable. Her world was decorative and isolated, a gilded cage of her own making. Her trust in Tom wasn't foolishness alone, it was loneliness. She welcomed him because she longed for admiration. In doing so, she unknowingly wrote herself into the dark ledger of magical history, not as a footnote, but as a turning point. Her name surfaces only once in the films, in a single caption during Slughorn's memory, without voice or face. But in the books, her legacy is preserved through memory, guilt, and consequence. When Dumbledore speaks of her death, it is with gravity. It confirms the scope of Voldemort's ambition and his cruelty, and it solidifies the idea that no act of evil is isolated. Hepzibah's death rippled through time, ultimately leading to the cursed objects that would haunt Harry and his friends in their final year. In the Deathly Hallows, when Hermione retrieves Hufflepuff's cup from Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, the scene is rich with horror. The cup, glowing and deadly, nearly destroys them with multiplying curses. That moment becomes infinitely more powerful when one remembers where it came from, snatched from a trembling hand by a smiling killer. Likewise, the locket they later destroy was once a gift wrapped in silk and treasured. These objects are haunted not only by magic, but by memory. They are tombstones for the people Voldemort destroyed. Had the films shown Hepzibah, they could have conveyed this weight more fully. Viewers would have seen the price of Voldemort's ascent not in statistics but in scenes. Her presence would have underscored the fact that every Horcrux was born of murder, not myth, and that every spell cast against the Dark Lord was in some way a requiem for the lives lost to his hunger for power. The decision to omit her may have been rooted in runtime, but in doing so, the films flattened the topography of Tom Riddle's rise. They removed the velvet drapes, the tea tray, the eager fingers revealing relics, and the cold calculation behind a young man's smile. They gave us Voldemort the tyrant, but not Voldemort the thief, the manipulator, the murderer in a parlour room. Hepzibah Smith's story remains a chilling reminder of what happens when the past is treated as possession and charm is mistaken for kindness. Her name should not be forgotten because within her brief appearance in the books lies the echo of a scream that no spell can silence. Her death was not an accident, it was a design, and it is through her that we see Voldemort not just as a villain, but as a man who murdered history smile by smile. Number 22, Marvolo Gaunt. In the rotting cabin on the edge of Little Hangleton stood a man with the pride of a king and the poverty of a beggar. Marvolo Gaunt, direct descendant of Salazar Slytherin, lorded over nothing but dust and decay. His shack was filled with filth and bitterness, yet he wore his bloodline like armour, convinced that pure ancestry excused his cruelty. Though he never appeared in any of the 8 Harry Potter films, Marvolo Gaunt was a vital puzzle piece in understanding the genesis of Tom Riddle's monstrous soul. Ignoring him was more than an omission. It was the erasure of a tragic prologue to evil. Marvolo was not only the grandfather of the Dark Lord, he was a living fossil of Slytherin's ideology, warped by time and madness. His only possessions of value were heirlooms steeped in darkness, a crude ring bearing the Peverell crest, and a locket traced back to Salazar Slytherin himself. "That's mine. My birthright," he snarled in the pages of Half-Blood Prince when Bob Ogden of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement tried to enforce the law in his home. Even his sense of property was poisoned by his belief in magical superiority. The ring was not a trinket to him, but a declaration of inherited power. Marvolo's home was more than just physically decrepit. It was spiritually diseased. There was no warmth, no love, only a festering sense of entitlement and hatred. His son Morfin was unhinged, violent, and dangerous. His daughter Merope was broken, quiet, passive, and trembling under her father's wrath. The house mirrored Marvolo's mind, cluttered with relics of the past, indifferent to suffering, and obsessed with bloodlines. J.K. Rowling described it vividly. The house smelt of mildew and decay. A threadbare carpet lay on the floor, and the furniture looked as though it had been rescued from a skip. Though he never held a wand to Tom Riddle's neck, Marvolo cast the first spell in the making of Voldemort's cruelty. His disdain for anyone not of pure blood seeped into the psyche of his children. Merope, in particular, absorbed that venom not by agreeing with it, but by being crushed under it. In silence, she learned that love was weakness and that magic was a tool to control. She used a love potion to ensnare Tom Riddle Sr., a a wealthy muggle, not because she believed in love, but because it was the only power she had been taught to wield. Marvolo's brutality toward Merope wasn't just emotional. He beat her when she showed signs of affection for the muggle boy in the village. "She's a filthy squib," he spat at Ogden, proud of his hatred. He would rather see his daughter dead than pollute the family line with muggle blood. This legacy of rejection shaped the destiny of her son. When Merope died alone after childbirth, she left behind a child who would never hear the word mother spoken with love. And it was Marvolo who set that tragedy in motion. The films chose to reduce Voldemort's past to a few orphanage scenes and a boy with an affinity for cruelty, but they robbed us of the core, the intergenerational rot that bred the most dangerous wizard of the age. Marvolo was Voldemort's unspoken tutor in hatred, his obsession with blood purity, his pride in a ruined name, his inability to love or protect. All these bled into the boy born from Merope's desperation. The ring, which later became a Horcrux, was once worn proudly by a man who believed it made him invincible through lineage alone. Dumbledore understood the significance of the Gaunt family. He sought their story because he knew evil was not born but built. The Gaunts were a nest of twisted individuals, all obsessed with their bloodline and unable to see how little it profited them, he explained. The irony was complete. Voldemort, who prided himself on his magical purity, was born of a magical girl and a muggle who had been bewitched into love. The very thing Marvolo tried to prevent became the foundation of his legacy. In a brief but poignant scene in the books, we see Marvolo arrested, ranting and screaming as he's taken away. He couldn't comprehend that his blood did not exempt him from consequence. "I'm a Gaunt," he roared, expecting the name to shield him. But even in the wizarding world, laws could still brush against pride. His short imprisonment led to his death, not by wand or curse, but by the quiet failure of his own body, neglected and alone. He died clinging to the past, refusing to adapt to the world that had moved on without him. The locket, another of Marvolo's sacred treasures, would eventually pass from Merope to Tom Riddle and become another Horcrux. It was a symbol of pride and possession, transformed into a vessel for immortality and corruption. But the object carried more than a soul. It carried a history of pain. It had once rested on Marvolo's chest as proof of his superiority. Now it radiated darkness through every hand it touched, from Creature to Dolores Umbridge. Each holder felt the echo of Marvolo's contempt. Even the ring, embedded with the resurrection stone, spoke volumes. Marvolo didn't know the true nature of the stone. To him, it was just another symbol of superiority. But to Voldemort it became a Horcrux, the ring that poisoned Dumbledore when he tried to destroy it. The path from Marvolo's finger to Dumbledore's blackened hand is not just the tale of an object, it is the journey of inherited sin. The films glanced over this thread, giving the audience Voldemort's actions without his roots. By cutting out Marvolo, they diluted the thematic weight of blood, legacy, and trauma. Tom Riddle's ambition, his disdain for muggles, and his obsession with conquering death did not appear out of thin air. They were etched into his family tree like curses, grown from the soil of Marvolo's tyranny. Morfin Gaunt, Marvolo's son, was perhaps the most visibly twisted by this legacy. He hexed muggles for amusement, carved snakes into his arms, and hissed Parseltongue in his sleep. It was Morfin who first saw Tom Riddle for what he was, a boy not seeking family, but information. And when Tom learned that his father was a muggle, he returned to the village and murdered him, a symbolic severing of the human half of his bloodline. Then he framed Morfin for the murders, leaving him in Azkaban, confused and babbling. Voldemort destroyed the last of the Gaunts, erasing their line while absorbing their ideology. The Gaunts lived in decay not just because of poverty, but because of their refusal to change. Marvolo believed that blood alone made him valuable, that ancestry was currency. He was the final echo of a time long gone, a time when names like Slytherin meant something without merit. That echo, however, passed into Voldemort, who tried to turn ideology into reality through murder, manipulation, and terror. In every way, Voldemort's obsession with the Hallows, with immortality, and with domination came from a fear that began in the Gaunt shack, the fear of irrelevance. Marvolo feared it and clutched to heirlooms. Voldemort feared it and split his soul. Both sought to make the world remember them, not through love, but through legacy and legend. One died in obscurity, the other died surrounded by enemies. By never showing Marvolo, the films missed a chilling contrast. The Dark Lord born not from wealth or power, but from squalor, hatred, and generational abuse. There's a peculiar justice in how Tom Riddle turned his back on the Gaunt name, rejecting his mother's surname and seeking a new identity. Yet everything he did echoed Marvolo's beliefs. Tom just had better manners and more ambition. The hatred was the same. The thirst for dominance, identical. There is a story in Marvolo's life that warns against the dangers of isolating one's self in pride. His home was a prison he built with his own ego. His family fell apart not because of curses, but because of the cold absence of love. And in that void Voldemort was born, not as a man of great vision, but as a child of broken inheritance. The ring, the locket, the shack, these were not relics. They were scars. What the films offered was a mythological Voldemort, snake-like, mysterious, unknowable. What the books offered was something more terrifying, a boy who came from real pain, real people, real damage. And at the root of it stood Marvolo Gaunt, shouting at the world from his rotting chair, clinging to a name that no longer mattered. The monster we knew as Voldemort was not just the result of dark magic. He was the final spell cast by a man long dead who never knew that his obsession with blood would bleed into history. In omitting Marvolo Gaunt, the films didn't just simplify the plot. They amputated the soul of Voldemort's origin. They gave us the storm without the thunderclap that warned of it. Marvolo was not just a side character. He was a ghost haunting the pages, proof that evil does not spring forth. It is passed down, twisted, and made flesh. His absence on screen left a silence, but in the books his voice still echoes, bitter and cold. Number 23, Morfin Gaunt. The memory was locked away in a small vial, glittering faintly like bottled sunlight behind Dumbledore's shelves in the pensive cabinet. Few in the wizarding world ever knew of Morfin Gaunt. Even fewer understood the magnitude of the moment when his shaking hands pointed a teenage Tom Riddle toward the house on the hill in Little Hangleton. He appeared in only fragments, flashes of a ruined family tree, whispers of blood tainted by obsession, and a single devastating encounter that sent ripples through the entire wizarding saga. And yet, Morfin never set foot into the 8 Harry Potter films. His absence left behind a silence where a chilling explanation should have echoed. Morfin Gaunt was not simply a mad recluse. He was a blood purist, the last living male descendant of Salazar Slytherin, before Tom Riddle inherited the line. He lived in squalor in the woods outside Little Hangleton, in a crumbling shack where the snake on the door was the only proud feature left. His wand was crooked and worn, tucked into rags. His teeth were yellow, but it was his mind that was truly broken, shattered by years of isolation, trauma, and inbreeding. The Gaunt family had, over generations, decayed in body and soul, obsessed with their pure blood and magical ancestry. J.K. Rowling introduced Morfin not through plot convenience, but through a dive into memory. When Dumbledore took Harry into the pensive in Half-Blood Prince, it wasn't simply to show a criminal, it was to show origin. In the worn and bitter face of Morfin Gaunt lay the roots of Voldemort's cruelty. Morfin, who snarled at muggles and hexed them for walking too close. Morfin, who wore the Gaunt family ring, the Horcrux to be, as if it were armour. "He's a muggle. He's a filthy, dirty muggle, isn't he, Merope?" he spat once in a memory, speaking of Tom Riddle Sr., the man who would become his nephew's father. What the films never depicted, and perhaps never dared, was that it was Morfin Gaunt who first told Tom Riddle of his heritage. A boy without a name, raised in an orphanage with no sense of belonging, Tom had already become cold and calculating by the time he visited Little Hangleton. But it was Morfin who pointed him to the truth. "Your father lives over the hill. A filthy muggle ran off with your mother," he said, barely coherent through his venomous bitterness. That moment changed the trajectory of everything. For Tom Riddle, the revelation was not just a family history, it was a betrayal of identity. His father, the man he imagined as powerful and magical, was a muggle. The shame of it twisted into hatred. Within hours of leaving the shack, Tom had made his way to the Riddle mansion. There, in the grandeur of chandeliers and tapestries, he cast the killing curse on his own father and his grandparents, Thomas and Mary Riddle. Coldly, methodically, with no sign of hesitation, that act of patricide wasn't random violence. It was the birth of Voldemort. Morfin didn't die that night, but his soul was taken all the same. Tom Riddle returned to the shack and confronted his uncle again, not to speak, not to thank him, but to obliterate him. With a flick of his wand, he altered Morfin's memory, planting false recollections of the murders and leaving the man to babble about how he got them, didn't he? The Ministry of Magic found the evidence they needed. Morfin's wand contained the spell traces. His madness only confirmed the case. He was sentenced to Azkaban, where he remained until his lonely death. He never knew the truth. The omission of Morfin's story from the films is not a small oversight. It is the absence of motive, the removal of the moment when Voldemort severed ties with his humanity entirely. The books allowed us to witness this evolution with chilling precision. When Dumbledore and Harry viewed the memory, it was not to build sympathy for Voldemort, but to understand the fearsome logic behind his every move. "He killed, not for revenge, but to cleanse his bloodline," Dumbledore said gravely. "Without Morfin, that realization is never earned on screen." The ring that Morfin wore, engraved with the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, became one of Voldemort's first Horcruxes. It was both a trophy and a perverse inheritance. Tom had stolen it before framing his uncle, sliding it onto his own finger as a mockery of his bloodline. In the films, the ring appears only in flashes, its origin left vague. But in the books, it is tied inextricably to Morfin Gaunt and the rotting legacy of the House of Slytherin. It is easy to see why the filmmakers may have skipped the Gaunt chapter. Visually grim and emotionally disturbing, it didn't fit cleanly into the film's pacing. But in doing so, they lost the story of how Voldemort first encountered a wand-wielding adult who recognized him, not as an orphan, but as kin. For Morfin, that recognition was brief and warped, but it planted the seed of truth in Tom's mind. The boy who had once asked Dumbledore about his father, who hated the idea of weakness, now knew the full repulsive picture. And he made his choice. The murder of the Riddles wasn't just an act of vengeance. It was Voldemort's first performance as a magician with power over life and death. The Ministry never questioned Morfin's guilt. The Gaunt name was already poison, and his history of violent behavior made the trial a formality. Even the magical community, for all its sophistication, failed to see through the ruse. It would take decades before Dumbledore pieced it together, recovering the truth from the memories of the dead and the broken. There is something particularly tragic in Morfin's fate. He was a cruel man, yes, but he was also a scapegoat, cast aside by society, by his family, and finally by his own blood. He lived in the shadows of a world he no longer understood. His belief in pure blood supremacy had consumed him. And yet, in the end, it was the very purity he clung to that destroyed him. The boy he welcomed, however bitterly, into the Gaunt legacy was the one who annihilated it completely. The visual of Morfin's hut overgrown with weeds, walls collapsing inward, a snake slithering beneath the hearth, is one of the most haunting in Half-Blood Prince. It is here that readers understand the cost of obsession. The Gaunts lived like paupers not because they were poor, but because they saw themselves as superior. They would not mix with others, they would not adapt. They would rather rot than bow. Morfin, like his father Marvolo, wore this arrogance like a cloak. But unlike Marvolo, Morfin's mind had already buckled under the strain. Harry's journey into Morfin's memory is not just a historical investigation, it is a ghost story, a cautionary tale wrapped in madness and betrayal. There is a shivering tension in the way Morfin recalls the past, as if he's stuck in a loop, doomed to relive the moment he met the boy who destroyed his world. In one of the most chilling lines, he mutters, "He looked like that man, the filthy muggle," not realizing he is speaking of the child born from the union he never accepted, a nephew he never recognized as a curse. The moment is small in terms of page count, but massive in consequence. Tom Riddle was already powerful, but it was Morfin who gave him a reason. It was the trigger, the gunshot that echoed for 7 books. Without that spark, would Voldemort have looked for his father? Would he have crafted his Horcruxes in the same way? The Riddle murders were not a stepping stone, they were a sacrifice. In omitting Morfin, the films removed a rare glimpse into Voldemort's vulnerability. For a brief moment in the books he is still a boy, reacting to betrayal, confused, enraged. The coldness comes later, but in that memory we see how easily truth becomes poison. Dumbledore understood this. That's why he shared it with Harry, not out of curiosity but out of necessity. You cannot defeat what you do. Not understand. The irony is cruel. Morfin, who prized blood above all else, was outwitted and destroyed by the very heir he might have celebrated. In a different life, perhaps, he would have raised Tom in the old traditions, taught him Parseltongue, passed on the Gaunt legacy. But madness and malice made such a life impossible. Tom saw no heritage worth saving, only ruins to be razed. And he began with Morfin. Morfin Gaunt never asked for sympathy, and the story never gave him any. He was a fragment, a jagged edge of Voldemort's origin, but that sharpness mattered. It showed how quickly a dark legacy could transfer from one generation to the next, not through love, but through hate, not by mentorship, but by blood and betrayal. What the films left as a mystery, the disappearance of Tom Riddle's father, the origins of the Ring Horcrux, the proof of Voldemort's calculated malice, the books stitched together with Morfin's broken life. He was not a footnote, he was the fuse, and the explosion he caused would engulf the entire wizarding world. In the shadow of the Gaunt shack beneath the tangled branches and warped stone lies the key to understanding Voldemort's transformation. It wasn't just power that shaped him. It was revelation, the kind that comes with cruelty, confusion, and the whisper of a mad uncle saying, "He left her, the muggle left her." With those words, the boy Tom Riddle became something else, something colder, something unstoppable. And Morfin, forgotten by the films, vanished into the howling wind. Number 24, Hokey the House-Elf. In a dusty manor tucked away in the English countryside, a frail house-elf named Hokey polished a silver goblet with trembling hands. Her knobby fingers moved carefully, methodically, worn from decades of loyal service. Hokey was not just a servant, she was the last companion of one of the most important witches of her time, Hepzibah Smith, a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff and the proud owner of ancient magical heirlooms. Hokey's presence in the story of Voldemort, while overlooked in the films, reveals one of the most sinister facets of his character and exposes a deeply troubling thread in the wizarding world, the quiet suffering of house elves invisible even to the viewers of the film adaptations. Hokey appears only briefly in the pages of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, but her role is critical. Dumbledore, sharing a memory with Harry, delves into the past to uncover Tom Riddle's transformation into the dark force that would become Lord Voldemort. In that memory, young Tom visits Hepzibah Smith under the pretense of admiration and politeness. Hepzibah, foolishly flattered by the handsome visitor, reveals her most treasured possessions to him, two objects of immense historical value and magical power. One of them is Hufflepuff's cup, the other is Slytherin's locket, once belonging to Salazar himself. That day marks the last time she is seen alive. What unfolds afterward is a story of calculated murder, manipulation, and a brutal scapegoating. Hepzibah is found dead, poisoned. The goblet she had shown Tom is tainted. Suspicion immediately falls on Hokey, her devoted house-elf. As the memory plays out, the Ministry accepts the narrative that an aging elf made a mistake with a potion. Hokey is punished. Voldemort, long gone, leaves no trace behind. A life is lost, another is destroyed, and no one in the wizarding world looks deeper. In the book, Dumbledore says with quiet certainty, "I think he killed her, just as I think he killed the Muggle boy and girl all those years ago." This moment, though it lasts only a few pages in the book, marks a chilling escalation in Voldemort's path toward becoming the Dark Lord. By blaming Hokey, Voldemort demonstrates not only cunning, but an utter disregard for innocent life, especially the lives he sees as lesser. House elves, in his mind, are no more than tools, things to use and dispose of. Hokey's story is the perfect encapsulation of that belief. She was an easy target, vulnerable, voiceless in society, and so her life was ruined to shield a murderer. The films chose to ignore this entirely. Hokey never appears on screen. The murder of Hepzibah is implied only vaguely, and the framing of Hokey is erased. In doing so, the films discard a vital illustration of Voldemort's moral decay. Viewers lose the chance to see how early he began perfecting the kind of deception and cruelty that would define his reign. More tragically, Hokey's quiet tragedy, the life of an old elf discarded like refuse, is removed, along with its commentary on exploitation. The wizarding world, even as seen through the pages of Rowling's work, has long turned a blind eye to the plight of house elves. Characters like Hermione Granger try to address it through SPEW, but she is mocked, ignored, and dismissed. Hokey's fate is the grim confirmation of everything Hermione feared. Here was an elf, completely loyal to her mistress, punished for a crime she didn't commit, and no one, not even her fellow magical beings, stood up for her. As Dumbledore implies, the evidence against her was weak, but the truth was simply less convenient than the lie. In ignoring Hokey's story, the films not only soften Voldemort's character, they mute the broader injustice at the heart of wizarding society. Voldemort's evil is not only in the grand battles or the flashy murders. It is in moments like this, when he takes an innocent life and ensures the blame falls on another without consequence. The Ministry, as complicit as Voldemort, accepts the explanation easily. House elves, after all, are not worth investigating deeply. Hokey, old and frail, could have simply made a mistake. No one stops to ask why a loyal servant would poison her beloved mistress. The name Hokey never enters the collective memory of the wizarding world. She disappears quietly. Her punishment is left ambiguous. Was she executed? Sentenced to a life of shame and magical suppression? No one knows. Even Dumbledore, who sees through the lie, does not mention trying to free her or restore her name. It is a striking reminder that even the noble in the wizarding world can overlook the suffering of the powerless. Hokey becomes a footnote when she should have been a symbol. Her story is also a rare glimpse into the inner world of Hepzibah Smith. A vain, wealthy, but not malicious witch, Hepzibah treats Hokey with familiarity, calling her by name, speaking to her not as an object, but as a companion. "Fetch me the box, Hokey," she says, and the old elf responds with shaky steps and unflinching devotion. Hokey does not protest. She does not question. She simply serves. In this one scene, we are reminded of the painful paradox of house elf servitude. They love those who enslave them, even unto death. The cup that Hokey carried into the room becomes one of Voldemort's first Horcruxes. In a bitter twist, it is her hands that deliver it to him. She doesn't know it, of course, but Hokey, like many before and after, becomes an unwitting agent in his rise to power. The act is so ordinary, an elf bringing a box to her mistress, that it masks the horror of what follows. That day, an ancient legacy is stolen, a life is taken, and another is ruined. And the world spins on. The memory of Hokey is not revisited. Dumbledore shows Harry the scene once and moves on, but for those who pause to consider it, the implications are staggering. If Voldemort could lie so perfectly, deceive so cruelly, and still leave no trace, what else did he do that went unnoticed? And how many more Hokeys were there, victims with no voice left behind in the dark corners of history? Her erasure from the films is especially jarring, considering how essential she is to the Horcrux storyline. Without Hokey, the theft of Hufflepuff's cup lacks a witness. The framing of an innocent being never happens. Voldemort's evil becomes a little cleaner, more cinematic. But that is not how evil works. Evil, as Rowling shows in this scene, is often quiet, efficient, and unseen. It lives in moments of injustice that are too mundane to notice. Hokey's moment in the book is short, but her legacy should not be. She is a lens through which we see the consequences of blind loyalty, the tragedy of systemic oppression, and the brutality of a villain who builds his power not just on murder, but on lies. Hokey didn't just die, she was buried under layers of bureaucracy, apathy, and cruelty. No one mourned her, no one remembered her, not even the films which had the chance to bring her back to life. Her presence would have added a layer of depth to the film's moral landscape. It would have offered the audience a glimpse into how Voldemort honed his manipulation. It would have given a face to the overlooked, the used, the discarded. In a world filled with dragons, spells, and legends, sometimes the most powerful story is the quietest one. Hokey, loyal and broken, is that story. In another world, perhaps her tale would have mattered. Perhaps the Ministry would have looked deeper. Perhaps Hepzibah's name would have been remembered with honor instead of scandal. Perhaps Hokey would have lived out her final days in peace. But in the world Voldemort shaped, there was no room for truth. Only silence. It is easy to forget characters like Hokey, but it is far more dangerous to ignore what they reveal. She was not just a victim, she was a mirror. And when we look away from that mirror, we let the darkness Voldemort spread continue to hide in plain sight. The films, by leaving her out, may have made the story more palatable, but they also made it less true. In the end, Hokey did what she was told. She served, she loved, and she died, punished for the crime of being small, old, and convenient. In doing so, she gave us one of the clearest windows into Voldemort's soul, and into the soul of the wizarding world that let it happen. Her story deserved to be told, not just in the book, but on every screen, in every retelling, in every reminder that even the smallest among us carry truths the world must not forget. Number 25, Alice Longbottom. Alice Longbottom, a name rarely heard in the halls of Hogwarts or the offices of the Ministry of Magic, and yet a name that once echoed with courage, strength, and sacrifice. Before her mind was shattered by the Cruciatus curse, Alice Longbottom stood shoulder to shoulder with Alastair Moody and Kingsley Shacklebolt, a formidable aura, a member of the original Order of the Phoenix, and a mother. She was never portrayed in any of the 8 Harry Potter films, a decision that stripped the character of Neville Longbottom of a haunting depth that could have rivaled even Harry's own tragic past. Her absence is a silence too loud to ignore. She was a warrior before she was a mother. She hunted Death Eaters with determination carved into her bones, knowing every day that she might not come home. She and Frank Longbottom were stars among the auras of their time, personally responsible for capturing countless followers of Lord Voldemort. Their loyalty to the Ministry and to Dumbledore's order was unshakable. The Dark Lord's downfall should have brought them peace. Instead, it brought them torture. After Voldemort's fall in 1981, the wizarding world breathed in relief. But there were those who believed he would return, and among them was Bellatrix Lestrange, fanatical and deranged. Alongside her husband Rodolphus, her brother-in-law Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr., she cornered Frank and Alice Longbottom, determined to rip the location of the fallen Dark Lord from their minds. But Voldemort was gone, and there was nothing to reveal. Cruciatus Curse is not just pain, it is the disintegration of identity. Alice and Frank endured it for so long that their minds unraveled. When they were found, the Ministry called it unspeakable. They were sent to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, not as patients to be healed, but as ghosts in living bodies, occupants of a long-term care ward for the incurably damaged. Their son, Neville, was barely a toddler. It is one of the most heart-wrenching scenes in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, tucked between tales of teenage rebellion and looming war. During a visit to St. Mungo's on Christmas Eve, Neville's friends accompany him through the chaotic corridors of the hospital. On the Janus Thicky ward, they meet Alice Longbottom. She does not speak. Her hair is greying, her eyes are vacant, and yet, in that fog, she offers Neville a gum wrapper, her one act of communication a shred of maternal instinct buried deep in her fractured mind. She gave Neville a piece of rubbish, and he looked as though she had just given him something rare and precious. "Thanks, Mum," he said. This line from Chapter 23 of Order of the Phoenix is a dagger disguised as gentleness. It reveals more about Neville's resilience and inner strength than any scene of him wielding a sword or standing against Death Eaters ever could. The gum wrapper is not just a symbol, it is the only thing she can give, and he treasures it because it's from her. The films never showed Alice. They chose instead to simplify Neville's backstory into something tidy and convenient, a shy boy who blossoms into a hero. But his roots were far more painful. The loss of his parents, who were alive but unreachable, was a slow, lingering kind of grief that defined his childhood. He grew up with his formidable grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, who pushed him to live up to the legacy of his parents. But how do you carry a legacy when its living bearers cannot speak your name? The absence of Alice from the films removes the emotional scaffolding that holds Neville's quiet courage together. He was not just the clumsy, forgetful boy who lost his toad and botched spells. He was a child who visited his mother in a hospital ward week after week, knowing she would not recognize him. He was the boy who kept her gum wrappers in a box in his room because they were all he had. In the books, Neville never complains. He never tells Harry, Hermione, or Ron about the full extent of his pain until they stumble upon it themselves. When they see him with his mother, there is no anger, only a deep well of love and loyalty. The films could have used that scene to show who Neville truly was, a boy who bore pain without bitterness, whose kindness had been forged in long visits to a hospital, where the strongest people he ever knew could no longer speak. Alice's story also serves a greater narrative purpose. It illustrates the true cost of war. In a series that often romanticizes resistance and valor, Alice is the reminder that heroism is not always clean or victorious. She did not die in battle. She lost her mind defending a world that forgot her. And yet she survived. She lived on, a silent monument to the brutality of the First War and the sacrifices made by the Order of the Phoenix. Neville's arc becomes more powerful when we remember what he comes from. His bravery in the Battle of Hogwarts is not sudden. It is not born out of circumstance. It is the natural culmination of a life shaped by loss, expectation, and the quiet strength of enduring what cannot be fixed. Alice's fanatically loyal attackers went to Azkaban. She never recovered. In a story about victory and survival, she embodies what it means to endure. It is telling that the films included characters like Lavender Brown, who died in a brief battle scene, and omitted Alice, whose story spans the entire series. The decision to erase her from the screen sanitized Neville's suffering and simplified his motivations. Without her, he is just another student who grows up. With her, he is a war orphan who never lost hope, even when there was no one left to return it. Her name is mentioned only once in the movies, and even then briefly. But in the books, she exists as a quiet spectre, always present in Neville's mind. His hesitation, his stammering, his longing to be worthy, they are all echoes of her sacrifice. He does not want to be great. He wants to be worthy of the parents who gave everything and from whom he cannot even receive a word. One of the most tender moments in the series is not a duel or a prophecy fulfilled, but a gum wrapper exchanged in silence. It is a child accepting a gift from a mother who does not remember him and thanking her anyway. That scene speaks more about love than any triumph or magical feat. Neville's confrontation with Bellatrix Lestrange in the Department of Mysteries gains even more gravity when we remember Alice. The woman who broke his mother stands before him laughing, dueling, unrepentant. And still Neville fights. He does not speak of revenge. He does not scream. He stands. That is the strength Alice gave him, not with words, but through the long ache of her absence. The books show us a boy who grew into courage, but only because he had to. He could not afford anger. He could not afford weakness. The films, in choosing spectacle over soul, gave us a hero stripped of his foundation. They showed us a sword in his hand, but not the empty wrappers in his pocket. There is something devastating in the idea that Alice Longbottom lives in a room full of others like her, each lost in their own shattered minds. It reminds us that magic, for all its wonder, cannot fix everything, and perhaps that is Rowling's most human message. In a world of wands and spells, some wounds do not heal. Some wars never end. By omitting Alice, the films also failed to explore the complexities of memory and identity. St. Mungo's Janus Thicky ward is not just a hospital, it is a prison for the forgotten. Alice, once a fierce aura, now wanders its halls, a relic of a war that most prefer not to remember. But Neville remembers. Every visit reopens the wound, but he returns nonetheless. That is what makes him a Gryffindor. Even Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, looks at Neville with a quiet sorrow. He knows what the boy carries. In Goblet of Fire, he tells Harry, "It matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be." Neville was born into tragedy, but he grew into a leader. That transformation is inseparable from the loss of his mother. In the final battle, Neville does not fight for glory. He fights for a world where no other child has to carry gum wrappers from a mother who cannot say their name. When he slays Nagini, the final Horcrux, he does so not to be a hero, but because someone must stand when others fall. That resolve comes from Alice. The films chose flash over feeling, action over ache. They gave us a Neville who fought bravely, but not the full truth of why. They never showed the woman in the ward, her eyes vacant, her fingers pressing a crumpled wrapper into her son's hand. They missed the chance to show what real, human sacrifice looks like. Alice Longbottom was never silent. She was silenced. There is a difference. Even in madness, she gave her son something. And Neville, who took that scrap and thanked her, who stood before evil and did not blink. That boy was shaped by a woman the movies forgot. But the books remembered. And in doing so, they gave us one of the most quietly tragic and powerful portraits in the entire series. Alice Longbottom never said a word, and yet her story speaks volumes.